Hey everybody, half of the year is over. June is done, if you can believe that. So it is time for me to share my top reads of 2020. 7 books. I'll explain later, so let's get started. Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. It's Russell with Ink and Paper Blog. How are you all doing? I hope you guys are safe. I hope you guys are cool. I hope that you are all doing well and lots of love with your family and your friends. And of course, I hope reading is going really, really well. It is that time of year. You're seeing a bunch of us put out our top reads of the year so far lists, and it's always exciting to see what people wind up putting on these lists. And I am really excited to share these 7 books with you. Now, why 7, Russell? I have read a lot of really good books this year. So as I was putting together this list, it was bigger and bigger. But what I started to really do for myself is I needed to talk about the books that I wanted to get into people's hands immediately. There are so many books that I could always talk about. You know how it is. I love lots of books. But these are the 7 so far, year to date, that have really stuck out in my mind, that I've recommended the most of all of the books that I've read year to date, and the ones that I keep going back to in my head. So, as always, get out your pen, get out your paper, get out your Goodreads, get out however you take care of your TBR. If you are able, please order these books from your local independent bookstore. They are all out, they are all available, and you can get your hands on all of them right now. And as always, I am going to do these in no particular order. So at the end of the year, I do them in no particular order, but I usually have my favorite at the end. Mid-year, I just do them in alphabetical order by author's last name, because who knows how everything is going to shake out by the end of the year. We never know. I do have some ideas though, but you know, we'll go from there. So let's get started. The first book I'm going to talk about is The Vanishing Half by Bennett, out from Riverhead Books. Now, Bennett wrote one of my favorite memoirs of a couple of years ago, The Mothers. I absolutely loved that book. And it's always a little scary when you start talking about reading an author's second book because you have such expectations, but Bennett did not let me down. Now, this is the tale of 2 sisters, Desiree and Stella. They grow up in a tiny little town outside of New Orleans that is a totally Black community, but everyone in the community has very light skin, and many of them are almost white passing and or are white passing. And they sort of stick within their own group, so everyone that's born and part of the community continues to have light skin. The 2 sisters decide one day that they want to leave their little town and run off to New Orleans and just, you know, they want to start life. They want to figure out what they want to do. When they get there, they get jobs, and Stella winds up leaving in the middle of the night without telling Desiree where she's going, and she leaves and she goes off without a word. Okay, we find later out in the book where she's gone, but what Desiree winds up doing, she winds up getting into a relationship with a man with very dark skin and having a child who also has dark skin, and that relationship is abusive, so she returns home with her daughter, and she winds up staying there for the rest of her life. She gets a job in town, and she winds up creating her life in a community that she thought she was going to leave forever. The story then goes on to follow all of these characters. Desiree's daughter winds up being quite a track runner and winds up getting a scholarship to UCLA. She winds up in LA where she meets a young trans man that she creates a relationship with. And then also sort of everything that goes together, she winds up running into Stella. And what happens is we learn the story then of Stella, who when she left New Orleans, she left passing as a white woman and she sort of never looked back. And all of these stories wind up coming back together and then apart. And we see really about the choices that are made. Now, these sisters were so close when they were young. So the sort of the fact that that relationship was severed just so Stella could move on and live her life in a different manner, and how she reacts to her own background versus how Desiree reacts and Desiree's daughter reacts, is sort of the juxtaposition of the novel. You sort of get it. This book is all about being comfortable in your own skin and who you are. And that is seen not only in the characters that of the sisters, but also of the daughter, of her relationship with, you know how bad I am at names, guys, so I completely apologize. The trans boyfriend's name, I cannot remember for the life of me. Their group of friends in LA. It's all about just being completely comfortable with who you are. I loved this book. I thought that it was fantastic. The characters are fully realized. The situation has such a poignancy. The writing is absolutely beautiful. There's an accessibility to Brit Bennett that I absolutely love, but it's done with such craft that you really just cannot stop reading her books. So I highly recommend The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. You can get your hands on it right now. Okay, next is a book that I read way back at the beginning of the year, and that's Cleanness by Garth Greenwell. This is out from FSG. Now, how to describe a Garth Greenwell book? It's almost like interconnected short stories. It's the tale of a young teacher in Bulgaria who is about to come home. He's about to return home from Bulgaria after teaching there, and each section is about a different relationship he had with someone within his teaching community, the general community, and also a number of his sexual/romantic relationships. This book is a lot about how our bodies can sometimes be conduits to experiences that form us as a person. There is some graphic sex in this book, but it really adds sort of a gravitas to the overall message of being comfortable with who you want to be and how those experiences really drive who we are going to wind up being. I hope that makes sense. Garth is a poet of a writer. Every sentence is beautiful. His writing is very dense, so I highly recommend either reading it out loud or listening to the audiobook, which Garth reads himself, because there's just a certain cadence and beautiful, I don't know how to even explain it, but the way it sounds when read aloud, it just adds even more power to an already powerful narrative. I love this book, and it really, it sticks with me. I think about it all the time, and I compare many a book to it. So that's Cleanness by Garth Greenwell, out now from FSG. Okay. The next book is a book that I thought no one was really talking about, which is so strange because the author's last book was such an outrageous success until Oprah recently picked it for her book club, and now I think a lot of people are reading it, and that is Deacon King Kong by James McBride. Now, James McBride won the National Book Award for The Good Lord Bird, which is a book I highly recommend you reading. I do recommend that one on audio as well, though, because it does have dialect in it, and it just is beautiful to listen to people speak the way that the book is written. Sometimes if you're trying to read it, you can't get the same sort of cadence with it, but that's not the book we're talking about. We're talking about Deacon King Kong. Deacon King Kong starts in a small community where we have Sportscoat, who is a deacon in his local church. He's sort of the town alcoholic. His wife has recently passed away. Her body was found in the local river, and he sort of has these conversations with her spirit. And he one day goes up to the young, sort of up-and-coming drug dealer, talks to him briefly, pulls out a gun, and shoots him. This action has many repercussions, and it's not only for just Sportscoat, but it's for the people his age and his friend group, for all of the young people that watch this event occur, and also many of the different other sort of demographics that are all involved within this community. The book starts sort of with this action and then turns into a bit of a mystery narrative. There is like a thriller aspect to it because everyone in the town, all of the drug dealers and sort of the people who are up to no good, wind up trying to find Sportscoat to sort of make him pay for what he's done, but he's sort of very hard to get a hold of. There is such a vivid cast of characters in this book. The church community, this guy, this sort of mafia guy that runs sort of a delivery, a smuggling organization and sort of what he wants in the world and the romance of his life and his relationship also with his mother. There's so many different aspects to this book, but it is truly about community and how one action can have a ripple effect across everyone, even if they weren't present. But sometimes you don't have to be present to be affected by what goes on in your community. I hope that makes sense. I highly recommend this book. I think that it is beautifully written. I think that the characters are so vivid. They literally walk off the page. And there's just a sense of purpose to the narrative that just gives your brain and your heart sort of this collective track to go down. And by the end of it, you will feel such great reward having read the book. So that's Deacon King Kong by James McBride. Yeah, highly recommend. And if Oprah recommends it, you know, go with that too. The only book I think in this list that did not come out this year is the book I'm going to talk about right now, and that is The Museum of Modern Love by Heather Rose. This was actually chosen by my friend Julia for my book club. This book came out a few years ago. I want to say, let me see here, came out in 2016. Heather Rose is an Australian author. This went on to win the Stella Prize. And yeah, no, this book blew me away. It's centered around an art exhibit by Marina Abramovich at the MoMA in New York City, where she, and this is an actual art performance art piece that occurred in real life, where she sat for a 3-month period in a chair across the table with anyone who wanted to come into the MoMA and sit across from her. She didn't say anything, she did not move, she just looked at you. And it created this experience of being, I believe, seen, maybe for the first time. What we do is we have a cast of characters that their lives are sort of revolving around this art exhibit, but we learn about them in sort of different aspects of who they are and how either being on the periphery of this exhibit and or partaking in the exhibit opens these people up to different sort of perspectives on how they are going to really interact with what life throws them. The main character, and I hesitate to say that because I truly believe that the main character is Marina. I think that her and her art exhibit are the main character of this book, but we're sort of introduced to everything through Arky, I believe is how you say his name. Let me make sure I'm getting that right. Arky, A-R-K-Y. He is a musician, he scores movies, and his wife has recently become ill, and she has filed a document with the court that sort of forbids him from being able to even come see her as she is in this home, basically passing away. And he loves his wife very much, and so he believes, following her wishes, but is getting all sorts of noise from other people about what they expect from him in this situation. And in sitting and watching Marina do what she does, he starts to think about his life and the relationship with his wife, his daughter, and how life sort of got away from him in a lot of ways. There are a number of other characters that are sort of thrown into the narrative in a way that sort of opens your eyes to the fact that Marina's exhibit takes us all to a point where sometimes the biggest obstacle in our lives is not seeing who we actually are or feeling unseen by those people we interact with. And at times it can just take one comment, one look from a stranger to sort of cause the earthquake that changes the topography of your life. I think this book is brilliant. I'm so glad I read it. And luckily for me, my book club is reading this, and Heather is actually going to come on the book club, and I'm so excited to talk to her. So excited. So that's The Museum of Modern Love by Heather Rose. This is out by Algonquin Books in the US, but I know it's out at least in Australia and the UK. I believe it's out everywhere. So I think you guys can get your hands on it. Can you tell how much I love these books? I've done only 4 of them, and I've already talked for almost 15 minutes. Every single one of them, you guys, I promise you, they're worth your time. The only piece of nonfiction that's going to make this list so far is my autobiography, of Carson McCullers by Jenn Shapland. I feel like I've talked about this book ad nauseum on my channel because I loved it so much. Now, Jenn Shapland was a PhD student at a university in Texas when she started to catalog Carson McCullers' belongings, or her, what is the word I'm looking for? Archive her belongings for the university, where she finds letters between her and some women that indicate Carson may have had intimate relationships with women that have sort of been washed out of her historical narrative. And so what Jenn decides to do is she starts to dive into that. And why this is called a memoir is because as she's doing this research on Carson, she is also sort of coming to terms with her own sexuality and the relationships and how she presents to the world her sexuality, to her family, to her self, and to her partner. So this book has a certain sense of poetry? A certain sense of poet, because that makes sense, Russell. A certain sense of poetry to it. The way it's sort of stylized gives you sort of like a flow and a way to it. But in the same time, it allows you to take stock and really fall in love, not only with Jenn and her story, but also really appreciate Carson and the life that she must have had to lead. I loved it. I absolutely think about it all the time. It's made me want to go back and read The Heart is the Lonely Hunter, which I think is a phenomenal book, and maybe even read more Carson, because I have not read a ton of Carson McCullers. But yeah, this book was amazing, and yeah, I can't stop recommending it enough. So that's my autobiography of Carson McCullers by Jenn Shapland, and this one is out from Tin House. I haven't listened to the audio. I don't know anything about the audio, but there's something for me that wants Jenn to read that audio and then listen to her read it. I follow her on Instagram and Twitter, and I'm kind of just, she lives in New Mexico, and I just think she's so cool and interesting. The next book we're going to talk about is The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickles. Say Carson McCullers enough, Carter, and I'm going to call you Carson McCullers. So Carter Sickles, this is out now from Hub City Press, and this book broke my freaking heart. This is set in the 1980s during the AIDS epidemic. We have a young man who moved from a small town in Ohio to New York to sort of become himself. And unfortunately, the AIDS epidemic hits him and his friend group smack dab in the face. His boyfriend at the time passes, and he finds out that he has HIV/AIDS. And what he decides to do is return home. He hasn't been home in years, but he returns home basically to die. What the narrative does is it takes that perspective and shows from many different viewpoints what this young man's life now it means to his family. We get the point of view of his mother. We get the point of view of his younger sister, who he was sort of a hero to at one time, but then disappeared. We also get how the community reacts. This is a small town in Ohio in the 1980s. What they did not know, what they did not understand, sort of hits our main character in the face, Brian in the face, sorry. And he has to deal with that. He has to deal with the relationship with his father gone sour. His father had one relationship with his son and now doesn't feel like that relationship's there. What I absolutely adored about this book is that it is very easy to take a time period like the 1980s, the AIDS epidemic, and how parents reacted to their sons and daughters dying, and put a 2020 sensibility on it. I think what Carter Sickles does brilliantly is he allows us to be frustrated with the parents, allows us to be upset with them, but also allows us to understand them. And there are times where you know that the mother is heart's breaking for her son, but she doesn't know what to do. And you see his grandmother just engage with him and love him for everything that he is. And you see the mother jealous of that. And that dynamic and sort of how he captured how I feel a lot of parents in the 80s must have felt, just is, it is sheer brilliance. Now, this book is about a man who also is chronicling the end of his life. And we know what's coming. You know what is coming. So there's a lot of heartbreak. There's a lot of sadness. There's a lot of loneliness. but there's a lot of growth, and there's a lot of people coming to terms with how they are now going to live their life. There is a section at the very end of the book where the father gets a voice, and it ripped my heart out. Reading this book, you guys know I'm a bathtub reader. I was reading the last section, bawling my eyes out. I highly recommend this book, highly. If you are fans of books like, let's see, Christadora by Tim Murphy, A Little Life by Hana Yanagihara, I think those are the type of books that you will, reads that you will associate with this. Not as sad as A Little Life, but does have that same sense of heartache. So I highly recommend The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickles, out now from Hub City Press. Many of my friends on YouTube, on BookTube, have talked about that book and raved about it. Matthew Sharapa, Jacqueline of 6 Minutes to Me, Kendra Winchester. So don't take my word for it. Take their word for it. I just second their word. Okay. Last but not least is probably the book you all expected to see in this list, because I have raved about it so much, but his last name's at the end of the alphabet in this stack. And that is Brandon Taylor's Real Life. I should have nothing more to say about this book, because to me, it is a perfect debut novel. This is the story of Wallace. Wallace is a 20-something gay, queer black man in the Midwest. He is going to graduate school, in order to do a degree in science. And this is the story of one weekend of his life where we sort of get to see all of the different angles and how all the different aspects of society and how they can affect a black queer man. He deals with race. He deals with being accused of misogyny. He deals with a sexual relationship that is undefined in what it really means. Is he being used as a fetish object? Is he an object of just, you know, desire? Is he really an object of someone who wants to start a relationship with him? He deals with racism. He deals with all sorts of things. This book talks a lot about how much one person could have to go through just over a weekend as a black queer man in the United States. And what it does beautifully is that it's told in such a way that at times your heart will sting, at times you will cry, at times you will laugh, at times you will be in awe of just the brilliance of Brandon Taylor. This book is perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Yeah, it is one of my favorite books that I have ever read. And so that's Real Life by Brandon Taylor, out from Riverhead Books. So, yeah, there could have been so much more to say about all of these books because they are all freaking fantastic. Let's hold this up there and make sure I don't drop it. These are the 7 books that I've read this year so far that I cannot get out of my head and I cannot recommend highly enough. So I hope every single one of them makes it on your TBR. And if you haven't read them already, please read them as soon as possible. As always, if you are a return subscriber, I could not do this without you. Thank you so very much. If you are new to my channel, I hope you stick around. I hope you like the books I talk about, and I hope that you subscribe and come back for more. As always, I encourage you to shop locally, read globally, and until next time, I wish you happy reading. Bye!